Hi, I'm Brian E. Denton, author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Inspiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is another installment in my series of videos on Dante's Divine Comedy. The inspiration for this series of videos is from Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project. In the 100 Days of Dante Project, what Baylor University proposes to do is gather a global readership, whether in line or in person, to discuss the Divine Comedy at a rate of 3 cantos per week. And I think it's a great project, so this is my independent contribution to the project. I hope you like it. The video format is quite simple. There are 3 parts. The first part is this introduction, wherein I will introduce myself and also the project, and I'll ask for your likes on this video, your subscriptions to the channel, and most importantly, as I hope this will become an involved book club type thing, I'll ask for your comments down below. So go ahead and ask me whatever you want about the Divine Comedy. I'm no scholarly expert on the Divine Comedy, but I am a passionate reader and, more importantly, a frequent rereader of the work. So I know a little bit, and I hope I can make your reading experience more pleasurable. In the second part of each video, I'll offer my synopsis of the canto. I'll get into the plot, I'll get into the characters, and I'll get into a little bit of the themes. And then in the third part, I'll offer my own thoughts on the canto with some key takeaways. Okay, so with that, let's go. Canto 3 of Dante's Inferno. In Canto 3, we begin with Dante and his guide Virgil starting in earnest on their journey down into hell. The first thing they encounter are those famous gates of hell, wherein are inscribed the words, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Grim. Next, as Dante and Virgil pass under the gates, Dante starts to hear these loud, wailing sighs emanating from within the impenetrable darkness, and he starts to cry. That's how intense these lamentations are. They're so tumultuous and full of rage that Dante, he starts to cry. He breaks down into tears. "Who are these people making these awful sounds?" Dante asks. And Virgil answers that these are the neutral angels. And then faint light appears finally, and Dante is first able to glimpse these neutral angels, and he notes that all of them are following this wavering banner. Dante also sees that these neutral angels are suffering a constant attack of insects that are biting and stinging their face. So violent is this biting and stinging that it's causing blood to flow from the brows down to the toes, and the blood is mixing with tears, and it's pooling at the feet of the neutral angels in a nest of worms. Virgil and Dante move on, and eventually they come to the river Acheron, where they meet Charon. And Charon is the entity personally responsible for ferrying over the dead souls. Charon, of course, Dante being a living soul, objects to Dante's presence on his boat. He refuses to ferry him to the other side. But Virgil, stepping in, demands that Charon do so, because this has been demanded from on high. So Dante gets into the boat, Charon gets into the boat, Virgil gets into the boat, and they start off into the other side. But this all proves way too much for Dante, and he passes out. And here, at the canto's end, is where we leave our heroes. Let's talk about characters and themes. First of all, who are these neutral angels that are so upset? Well, these neutral angels are the angels who refuse to take a side in the war of Satan's rebellion against God. So what I think is fairly clear here is that Dante is imploring us that we have to be decisive and we have to take a side on the things that matter, right? Because these neutral angels, you'll note that they're not in hell. This is still on the other side of the river Acheron, so they're not in hell. But they also can't get it in heaven. So they're not worthy of either heaven or hell. I don't know what to make of that. Let me know what you think about that down in the comments. It's quite odd. And what about Charon? Charon, of course, is from Greek mythology. And it was his duty in Greek mythology to ferry over the river Styx and Acheron those souls of the deceased who had received the rites of burial. And that's essentially what Charon is doing here. He's ferrying dead souls across the river Acheron. So once again, we have Dante, a Christian, writing a thoroughly Christian poem, but using pagan imagery and pagan characters to tell his Christian story. And that's my synopsis of the plot, the characters, and some of the themes. I'll now be moving on to my takeaways. The first takeaway from this canto, and indeed probably the most important, is the idea of the contrappasso. The contrappasso in Dante appears many, many, many times throughout the Inferno. And it appears here for the first time with the neutral angels. So what is the contrappasso? Essentially, contrappasso is the idea that the sinners are going to receive a punishment that is at the same time similar to and yet opposite of their sin. Right? So let's look at the neutral angels. What was their sin? Well, their sin was that they failed to choose sides in the battle between Satan and God. They were indecisive. So, because the neutral angels were indecisive in life, their punishment, the contrappasso, is to be ultra decisive in the afterlife for all of eternity. And that is, they're going to be following this banner all the time, all day, every day. Right? Because when you go to war, you follow a banner. You rally to the banner. Whereas in life, they did not do it. Now in the afterlife, they're going to be forced to do that. And there's an extra element of contrappasso to them too. Dante suggests that their indecisiveness betrays a certain inner lack of stimuli, right? So now, for all of eternity, they're going to suffer from this constant state of external stimuli in the form of these insects stinging and biting their face.
Very allegorical.
Okay then, the first takeaway is the idea of the contrappasso. And the contrappasso is going to be the punishment that the sinners receive that is both similar to and yet opposite from the sin that they committed in their lives. And we're going to see this throughout the entire poem moving forward. So these poor neutral angels, they would have been so better served had they heeded the words of Aeschylus, who wrote in the Suppliants, "Justice stands by those who fight for her." The second takeaway from Canto 3 is the role of poetic imagery. And poetic imagery is very important for Dante, particularly as it pertains to the punishments of the sinners. You definitely noticed it in this with the neutral angels. It's strong, searing imagery. You can see, indeed you can almost taste, the obscure grime filling in the words inscribed on the gates of hell. And those two intense triplets detailing the punishments of the angels when they're covered, Candyman style, in biting and stinging insects. Blood streaming down their faces, mixing with tears and pulling at their feet amidst a nest of worms. It's pretty strong stuff. I think the best way to read this poem is to let it really seep into your soul. Let the words flow through your mind. Let the poetry paint its picture. Really see it. Really see it to really know it. Just don't read it quickly to get it done. What this type of deep, involved, contemplative reading will induce in you, I hope, is a sublime aesthetic experience. And what I mean by sublime aesthetic experience is what Edmund Burke meant. Burke writes that whatever is fitted in any sort to excite the ideas of pain and danger, that is to say, whatever is in any sort terrible, or is conversant about terrible objects, or operates in a manner analogous to terror, is a source of the sublime. That is, it is productive of the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling. Now, why would Dante want to invoke this feeling in you? Well, as Burke continues, the passion caused by the great and sublime in nature, when those causes operate most powerfully, is astonishment. And astonishment is that state of the soul in which all its motions are suspended with some degree of horror. In this case, the mind is so entirely filled with its object that it cannot entertain any other, nor by consequence reason on that object which employs it. Hence arises the great power of the sublime, that, far from being produced by them, it anticipates our reasonings and hurries us on by an irresistible force. So what happens during these moments of sublime aesthetic experience is that our reasoning and intellectual faculties, rather poor instruments of understanding anyway, are temporarily stunted, and therefore allowing the more durable knowledge born of intimate emotional experience to carry the day. And within this momentary state of sublime contemplation, you'll be more open to Dante's arguments. Our third takeaway is the role of the simile in the poem. This powerful poetic device is used by Dante throughout the entire Divine Comedy. In fact, I believe at least one simile appears in almost all of the cantos. The simile in this canto is of particular interest to me because it touches on the topic of determination and free will. The simile occupies the lines 112 through 117. Just as in autumn the leaves fall away, one and then the other, until the bough sees all its spoil upon the ground, so the wicked seed of Adam fling themselves one by one from shore at his signal, as does a falcon at its summon. This is an interesting simile, and I want your comments down below on what you think it means. What is Dante saying here? Is this an argument for predetermination or predestination? He's saying, after all, that those crossing Acheron and a falcon returning to the falconer, two sentient creatures presumably in possession of independent agency, are like leaves falling from a tree. They're either crossing the Acheron or returning to the falconer, not of their own accord, but as an operation of nature. So from this simile, we might think that Dante is arguing against free will, but this notion is in tension with other parts of the canto. Take Virgil's explanation to Dante in this canto that there must be no cowardice here, and he must banish all distrust. What Virgil is saying, I think, is that the place they're going to, hell, is a place of justice. And if this is a place of justice, then these punishments are fair. This must mean that the denizens of hell are worthy of their punishments. And one can only be worthy of a punishment, and therefore not worthy of pity, if the reason for the punishment was an act of free will. And indeed, we see in line 124 that these souls are eager to cross the river, which also implies free will. Anyway, similes are very important in the Divine Comedy, and I hope you'll pay attention to them. Okay, that concludes my video on Canto 3 of Dante's Inferno. I really hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoy making these. Let me know your comments down below, or leave any questions that you might have. I may be able to answer them. Like I said before, I'm not an expert when it comes to Dante, but I am a really passionate kind of amateur, I guess. You can follow me on Twitter at Brian E. Denton. And keep in mind that we're going to be reading on the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday schedule, along with Baylor University's 100 Days of Dante Project. So I will see you on Wednesday. Until then, take care of yourselves and others. The second takeaway from Canto 3 is the role of poetic imagery in the poem. And this is very important for Dante.